Hi, hello everybody. We are coming in here after a week break for our next video topic that we're going to go ahead and cover here, which is in relation a little bit to the time of the year, but this isn't specifically a Halloween tale, more just kind of a dark tale from American history that's not exactly something that a lot of us like to talk about, and it's kind of infamous. And today's topic that we're going to briefly discuss, I don't think it's going to be really the longest of videos, but we're just going over the main events here, is the events concerning the traversing in 1846 of the Donner Party that tried to cross the Rocky Mountains, tried to get to California along with the great horde of settlers that were trying to get west. And unfortunately for the Donner Party, the reason that they are so infamous is they ended up getting stuck in the mountains and for a couple months were stranded while it was snowing in the winter. And I think the most infamous part of all is there were actual instances of cannibalism among the survivors of living. They didn't, to our knowledge, they didn't kill anybody outright just to eat them, but they did feast off dead human bodies. Well, that's kind of where it gets its little bit of infamy from. So today we're going to discuss the events surrounding the Donner Party, which happened back in 1846, and we're just going to go over kind of the basic story of what happened with the Donner Party, where did it happen, and just the basic stuff that everyone probably finds creepy. We're not going to go into heavily specifics like the weather and everything else. No, we're just going over the main story. All right. So the Donner Party here is the first of our creepy videos for October, which we're only probably going to have one more, but the Donner Party is going to come about in the 1840s. And the 1840s is a time when Americans are trying to move the frontier ever further west. In the 1840s, Western fever is starting to take a hold on Americans, partly out of many different reasons. You have Americans that want to just go west and get cheap land. You have Americans that want to go west and find gold and precious resources. And we also have to keep in mind that the West is also still being heavily contested at this time because Oregon is being argued over who owns it between the United States and Great Britain, while California and almost the entire modern day American Southwest is under the administration of Mexico up until 1848. So at the time of the Donner Party actually going to California, California is actually part of Mexico. And it's right at the year that the Mexican-American War breaks out, and we're actually conquering California from Mexico. So there's a little bit of transgression there. But the 1840s sees a huge horde of migrants starting to head west, specifically to what will become the state of California. California is right on the Pacific coast. It is rich in natural resources. It's not a desert in most places, like a lot of the Southwest is. It's not Nevada. No one wants to live in Nevada. Nobody. The government owns more land in Nevada than any other state. You know why? Because no one wants to live there. Now, the settlers are going to try heading out to California. This is their main destination, and the Donner Party is no different. Many are going to travel along on wagon trains, as we might see in the old Oregon Trail games. They're going to have wagon trains with families and other families that aren't even directly related to them, but might be family friends or something, that are also going to join them on these long journeys along what are commonly called trails. Trails that lead out west that have been well mapped, well worn, well used, and people know these trails are safe and they're going to get you to your destination out west because there's no major highway. There's no airplanes yet. You can't take you could take a ship, but you'd have to sail all the way around South America because there's no Panama Canal. So at this time, trails are the way to go. You go on a wagon train and you're going to be out for about at least half a year. It's going to take a couple months to get out there. And this is the method of travel out west. Now, the Donner Party officially gets its beginning on April 14th, 1846, in Springfield, Illinois, no less. Actually, where I got this Land of Lincoln shirt, which I went for the Abraham Lincoln aspect. But it actually shocked me to find out that the Donner Party actually set out from Springfield, Illinois. And they were being headed by the families of George and Jacob Donner, who I believe were brothers. And they came along. They decided, you know what? We're going out west. It's cheap land, mostly, is what they wanted, I believe. And they decide, we're going to start a wagon train. We're going to head out west. So George and Jacob Donner decide they're going to take their families out west. They're leaving Illinois and they're going to move out to California. Their close family friend, James Reed, he decides he's also going to go ahead and come along with these men, and he's going to take his family too. So they leave their home of Springfield, Illinois on April 14th, 1846. I don't know what is up with that date, but that is a horrible date in many, many different ways. You can really literally look it up on history videos and other historical coincidences, but April 14th just seems to have some bad mojo attached to it. I don't know why. Don't know why it seems to happen. For instance, two other events that would have happened on April 14th. On April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot. On April 14th, 1912, about 11:40 p.m., the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg and began to sink. So I don't know what it is with April 14th, but that is not a very happy date when it comes to history usually. And this is no different. I mean, this might not be the Donner Party resorting to cannibalism on April 14th, but this is the start of their ill-fated trip that's going to kill quite a few people. And when they leave Illinois, they have over a dozen Teamsters, and which are basically employees that work for the different parties as well that are going to come along with them. So they have their families, and they're also going to have some employees of the families who are also coming along for the journey. Initially, you had about 31 people in the initial wagon train that the Donner Party was that were coming along. By May, the party had finally reached Independence, Missouri, and then they joined a main wagon train out of Independence, Missouri that would take them to California on May 12th. And initially, they followed the Oregon Trail. And they follow the Oregon Trail until they get to Wyoming. This takes about roughly 650 miles in 6 weeks, so about a month and a half to get out to Wyoming from Missouri. Now, that might not look far, but if we look at a globe here, here's Missouri, and you're going out to Wyoming. You're going out to Lake Fort Laramie, which is actually marked right here. It's very tiny. But you're going out here to this green one. That's a little bit of a ground to cover in a wagon train. You're not moving at 30 miles an hour. You're lucky if you're moving 5. It takes about a month and a half to get out there on the wagon train. And when they reach Fort Laramie, which is kind of a major stopping point on the Oregon Trail, they stop and rest, as many wagon train travelers would do. And on July 20th, this is where it starts to divert. On July 20th, the train divides. Most of the train continues along the well-known Oregon Trail and continues through Wyoming. They're going to go up, I believe, a little bit into Montana and Idaho, and then come back down toward Nevada, I believe, is what it did. I'd have to look again. But they're going to go toward Fort Hall in Idaho along the Oregon Trail. The Donner Party and some others that they've managed to kind of get with them, so there's been some people that decide to join the Donners, they're going to turn southwest toward Fort Bridger, which is, I believe, in Nevada, I believe? Or it was in Nevada. I don't think it really exists anymore. Yes. So they're going to turn southwest to Fort Bridger. Now, they had chosen to do the opposite of everybody else because they were given information by a man named Lansford Hastings about a possible shortcut to California, which was dubbed the Hastings Cutoff. Hastings was kind of a little bit of an amateur explorer. He wasn't exactly a very confident one. He wasn't a real good one. And he was not the most trustworthy of guides. And he come back from California. He's at Fort Laramie when the Donners arrive, and he is telling about this marvelous shortcut that he took to get back to Fort Laramie that shaved about 150 miles off his trip, saying, "Oh, take it! You'll get there so much quicker. It'll save you all kinds of, travel time." And the Donners are all for it. I mean, the Donners, they want to get to California. If it means you can shave 150 miles off us having to walk or take the ox, hot dog. Problem is, Lansford Hastings is an absolute idiot. There is no such shortcut. And he is not a good measurement. And this is where the Donner Party is going to be a little bit faded. In fact, the other travelers at Fort Laramie in Wyoming kind of knew about Hastings' reputation of being an untrustworthy source, and some of them had heard him talking with members of the Donner Party. And after he was done talking with them, some of these other travelers would actually come up to leaders of the Donner Party and literally warn them against taking his advice and saying, "This is not the most trustworthy man to be taking travel advice from. I advise you to stick with the trail." Of course, that didn't happen. And the party elects George Donner to be the leader of the wagon train as they go through the Hastings Cutoff. At this point, upon setting off from Fort Laramie in Wyoming, the party is now at a total of 87 people, 29 men, 15 women, 43 children, and 23 ox wagons. And they are all going to set off from Fort Laramie down the Hastings Cutoff. Now, where is the Hastings Cutoff? The normal Oregon Trail from Fort Laramie went roughly, I'm going to try to get this as close as I can. I don't know how good it's going to be. Went roughly up into Idaho a little bit, then comes down into Nevada with the Humboldt River and goes to California across the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, because you're going north a little bit to kind of get through a pass through the Rockies, it does take a little bit longer, but it's been a well-timed and tested route. It's not going to fail you. It's one that's used every year. The Hastings Cutoff that Lansford Hastings claims is there, instead of taking them through Idaho to get over here and kind of this arch around it, he says go around the Great Salt Lake in Utah, which is desert, literal desert in the Great Basin. You're going to go around the Great Salt Lake, and then you're going to rejoin the Oregon Trail here. And this is going to shave you roughly 150 miles off your journey. It did not do that. In fact, it actually added 125 miles to their journey overall. The Donner Party sets out for the Hastings Cutoff on July 31st of 1846. They're going to take the group south of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, but they do not realize that Hastings Cutoff is going to add an extra 125 miles to their journey instead of deducting 150. This is going to cost them the one thing that ends up being kind of the doomsday of the Donner Party, and that is time. It's July 31st. You're in Wyoming at this point. You're going into Utah. You got to get to California before the snow starts. Now, you might think, well, it's late summer. They'll be in there. Mind you, you're moving at about 5 miles an hour or less. And it took you a month and a half just to get to Wyoming. And you left in May. And you didn't get there till July. So what does that tell you? And think, they got to go over the Rocky Mountains. They got to go through the Rocky Mountains and over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Snow is going to start accumulating on those mountains a lot earlier than after Thanksgiving. And once it sets in, the mountains are impassable at that point with a wagon train. So you're kind of pushing. Early November or late October is going to be your deadline. And here it is, one day short of August. So this is what kind of dooms them, is the timing that ends up being taken from them because they took this supposed shortcut. Now, they're going to cross the almost inhospitable Great Basin area, which is mostly desert. That's like Nevada and Utah area is the Great Basin. Now, during the first week of taking the Hastings Cutoff, the Donner Party did make some actual decent, mindful progress, and Hastings had actually promised to lead them, but fortunately for him, he somehow went off with another party that left out of Fort Bridger with another wagon train. He didn't come along with them. So James Reed, the family friend of George and Jacob Donner, who had been the primary one to speak with Hastings, he ends up kind of acting as the guide for the party, since he's the one that got the information from Reed and is kind of the one that talked with him about the exact route. So he starts acting as guide as they're going through the Hastings cutoff. Now, as the party reached the Wasatch Mountains, they had to break an entirely new trail because there was no trail established there, so that took time, just breaking in a new trail, and this is going to cost them about 2 weeks' time. So now we're looking about mid-August. And on August 30th, after gathering water and grass, they enter the Great Salt Lake Desert around the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Now, Hastings' note stated that the party should be able to cross the desert in 2 days. It took them 5 days to cross the Great Salt Lake Desert, not 2. That's more time. That's pretty much a whole week almost. The party also, during the crossing through the desert, and this is probably to be expected, they lost many cattle, and several wagons had to be left behind because when you lost the cattle and oxen, some of them due to heat exhaustion or depravity of water, you can't pull all the wagons anymore. So already they're encountering trouble just upon entering the desert. Valuable time would further be lost when they did a search for missing oxen in the Ruby Mountains of Nevada when they were trying to get there. As they enter in Nevada, some of the oxen somehow got loose and they start chasing after them. And they ended up going in a full circle, trying to look for these oxen. By the time that they're done doing this search for them, it is late September. By late September, they have finally reached the Humboldt River and rejoined the California portion of the Oregon Trail. Late September, you got a month to get your butt moving, and you're still in Nevada. And you gotta go over mountains yet. And this is also where it's sad, is by the time the Donner Party got back on the California Trail in late September of 1846, all of the other parties that had headed west and that they had been with earlier on, they had already reached California by that point, just by following the regular route. So this is also kind of indicating they're alone. They're alone out here at this point. Now, at this point, they're racing the weather. The snow's going to be coming in about a month, and if they don't get through the Sierra Nevada mountains before the snow falls, they're going to be trapped. So they start a race against time here. Now, tensions start to run high because of that, and James Reed actually has an altercation on October 5th with another man I think it was one of the Teamster employees that was in the party. He actually gets into a physical altercation with him and ends up stabbing and killing the man. Now, there was talk of hanging Reed, but the party kind of ultimately came to the decision, no, we're not going to kill him, but he's not continuing with us. So they cast him out, exile him out of the party. His family is free to stay in it, and they do. His wife and, I believe, his children. But as for him, he's given a horse, and he sets out to California on his own. He actually would survive. So would his wife. And I believe his kids did, I think, too. I'm not certain on the kids. But they would actually survive this ordeal even though they were separated. And Reed was kind of the one that alerted the people in California once November set in and the party wasn't there. He kind of realized, uh-oh, something wrong. Come help me. So if they hadn't done that, I mean, the Californians probably wouldn't have even had an idea that the Donner Party was even trapped and stuck and gone out sending a rescue mission for them. But at the same time, you just banished your guide. James Reed has been acting as your guide through this whole ordeal, so now with the guide gone, you're going to be even slower. Beginning the ascent through the Sierras in mid-October, the pioneers were very low on food. They also had Indian Paiute warriors, the Native American Paiute people, had land nearby, and they actually started to attack the party and actually managed to kill several of the oxen, which didn't help their transportation needs. Now, the company members of the party began to cache and bury all of their possessions except what was absolutely necessary for their survival, because they're trying to lighten the loads of the wagons so that the few oxen and cattle they have left can actually pull them and get them over the mountains, because they argue, we'll hide it, we'll put all this crap in one spot, and when the spring comes, we'll come back and we'll retrieve it. We don't need this to live, leave it here. As they approach what is now the infamous Donner Pass on, coincidentally, October 31st of 1846, so Halloween, they find themselves blocked by deepening snow in the mountains. As they're coming up through the Sierra Nevada mountains in late October, on Halloween, no doubt, on October 31st, they have to stop because the snow is already falling. They're trapped at this point. They have no way of getting to California, and then obviously not going to head back because there's a desert behind you. So you're stuck, and you're hoping maybe the snow will lighten up that we can continue. That doesn't happen. The Donner Party will remain in this position until the spring. And this is where the Dark Party comes into play. Most of the Trap Party would end up building some crude sheds and encampments near what is now called Donner Lake. Of course, it was there then, but it wasn't called Donner Lake then. And the Donners, who were slightly behind due to a wagon accident, so this was mostly the Reed family and the other travelers, they set up on Donner Lake. The families of George and Jacob Donner actually set up a little further to the east on Alder Creek because they had had a small wagon mishap and were just a little bit behind. And mind you, they arrived on October 31st. That is when the snow starts falling in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And for 8 days after that, it was continuous snow. Just absolute continuous. And I would have a picture of it, but unfortunately, my printer has decided it needs some ink, so I'm waiting on ink, unfortunately. But there is an actual picture you can look up, and it shows these trees that they found a couple years afterward that have been cut down by the Donner Party when they were encamping, and you realize how they cut it up so high. Well, that's how deep the snow was. It was that high. That the top of the tree where it's cut off was actually buried that deep, up to that deep in snow. There was a lot of snow when you actually look at it. Now, many of the oxen, in the meantime, during those 8 days of continuous snow, they wander off and they got absolutely lost. That was their main source of food for the winter. Was those those oxen? So now you don't have food, and winter's setting in. It's November, and you're in the mountains. It's cold. November 20th, on that date, the first person in the party ended up trying to keep a diary, and that was Patrick Breen. And he is significant because his diary that he would keep from November 20th until March 1st is the only written account we have of the Donner Party's ordeal. It is the only thing to physically survive that was written, was that physical account in the diary. On December 15th, the party experiences its first death, that of Bayless Williams, who was an employee of the Reed family. He ends up being dead of malnutrition. He wasn't getting enough food. He was starving to death. So on December 15th, he ends up dying. On December 16th, a party of 10 men from the Donner Party and 5 women end up setting out across the mountains to try to reach California and get help at this point. Because at this point, they realize if we stay here, we're pretty much going to die. We've got to try to get some help. Send a relief party or something. So they send a relief party of 10 men and 5 women. You go out, try to make it across these mountains because you're not carrying a wagon on you and everything else. See if you can go get help. Over the next month into January, the group faced deep snow, cold, storms, and inadequate food as the conditions just got worse as the winter progressed. 8 of the men actually died, and the bodies were then reportedly eaten by the others just to live. And this was confirmed in a couple of people's recollections about the party, because there were survivors out of this. And I believe in Breen's diary, he did note once or twice about how they actually cooked the human meat on some occasions. They had actually taken it and cooked it just to make sure that they could actually, eat it. Hmm. And now, for this relief party that ends up being sent out, they actually end up reaching the Sacramento Valley. They do actually make it to Sacramento. And they urge the California settlers as soon as they get there, like, please come help us. Our families are stuck in the mountains, they're trapped in snow and they're gonna freeze to death and they can't do anything. And luckily enough for them, the Californians there are sympathetic to them and say, all right, where are they at? And on January 31st of 1847, a relief party ends up leaving Fort Sutter, which is what will become Sacramento. After struggling through deep snow themselves, the relief party finally reached the encampment and found at least seven of the men did, not all the relief party, but seven men out of the relief party finally reached the lake camp on Lake Donner on February 18th of 1847. At this point, they have been trapped there since November. And the seven men took 23 of the starving immigrants that they did find. It was mostly children. I think 17 of them were children, and they took them back to the settlements. Unfortunately, some of them were in such a malnourished and, bad condition, some of them didn't make it back to the settlements, and they ended up starving anyway. The other relief parties that came along, they followed and went back to the same site to retrieve more of the Donner Party members that had been trapped. Unfortunately, due to illness and injuries, they weren't able to get everybody. Quite a few people actually died there or right on site when they had found them, or some people died on the way back. And what was recorded among the things in, I believe, Breen's diary was that cannibalism did not set in immediately with the Donner Party. At first, they tried to eat anything they could that was edible. So, at first, eat the cowhides. Not exactly the most appetizing thing, but you gotta live. Once they were out of cowhides, they went to the dogs. Yes, they ate dog. Yeah, I know that's hard for some of you dog lovers out there. They ate a dog, but it's either the dog or them. So they cooked the dogs, and then they ran out of dog. They don't have ox. They ate the cowhides. It's winter. You're not going to find, berries and nuts and all kinds of bountiful fruit and veggies. So they obviously turned to the only thing that was there dead that could be cooked, and that was human flesh. The dead people that were dying of malnutrition and starvation and the cold and everything else, these were the ones that they started eating. They didn't kill them. They waited till they died first. Then they ate them. But cannibalism set in after they'd eaten everything else, and the survivors were forced to resort to it or die. It was not something they wanted to do, but something that they realized we're going to have to do if we want to live. And Louis Kieseberg is the last survivor who ended up leaving the camp. I believe he left on April 21st, and he actually supported himself in those final weeks specifically by cannibalism. That is exactly what he ended up doing. He blatantly admitted, oh, yeah, I ate dead bodies. I had to eat dead bodies. It's disturbing because humans are the type of species that we don't like thinking of other humans eating humans. We don't think that's normal in society. But in the past, it was not that uncommon. Although most of the time, it would be with a dead body. It wouldn't be by killing a victim in most cases. So on April 21st, with the leaving of Louis Kieseberg from the camp, that brings an end to the Donner Party's ordeal because he's the last person that is actually leaves and makes it. So with that, the site is cleared and anyone that has survived is out. So what was the death toll, though, of this ordeal that the Donner Party went through? You had about 5 who died before even reaching the mountain camps, just going through the Hastings shortcut. And you had about 34 who died in the mountains or while attempting to cross them. and two men who ended up joining at the lake, at the very Donner Lake, because these must have been two other men that either were wanderers or maybe got stuck behind their wagon train or whatever it was. They ended up coming across the stranded Donner Party, and they actually joined them at the lake, and they also ended up dying and perishing that winter. In total, you had 41 total deaths in relation to the Donner Party, with 34 of those 41 deaths being at the mountains when they were trapped there over the winter, and 47 survivors out of a party that had numbered originally in the 80s. And that is, again, I mean, this is not the longest video of all sorts, but that is the basic story of the Donner Party. Now, those survivors would go on years later, and some of them would even go back and try to help others get over the mountains in the years to come. More Western settlers, I mean, not go back to the site. But many of them would continue their lives. I mean, it was a dark, tragic story, but those things did happen on the West. But the reason I think the Donner Party has always stood out is because it serves as a kind of a message of warning to the Western settlers that time is of the essence. You've got to move, take the well and trusted routes, don't go off the grid, don't trust people you don't know, because it could kill you out here. And of course, the whole prospect of the back then, I mean, cannibalism is still a bad thing now, but back then cannibalism is much more tied to the religious aspect and everything, and people they're utterly appalled by it and disturbed by it. I mean, we're still disturbed by it, but not as much as we would have been in the 19th century when this occurred. And I think that also stuck out with people, is just the fact that you had humans eating human flesh just to make sure that they lived and they didn't want to die. And I think a lot of people, just like today, would find that disturbing or absolutely disgusting that they would even do it. But again, put yourself in that situation and imagine, what would you do? Would you go ahead and eat that, nice bit of roasted person, or would you just sit there and slowly freeze and starve to death? Which option would you take? Yes, you might not like have the fact that, oh, it's a dead person. Well, yes, it's a dead person, but if you eat it, you might actually come out of this alive and continue your life. So you had to make that decision on your own. Were you willing to risk that, or was this something that you weren't going to risk? And the Donner Party, of course, nowadays we have far worse things, but it's maintained its sense in the back of the American mind, I believe, because of the tragedy of the story of these settlers who were just trying to go out, get out to a new land to start a new home, and then because of the ill advice of a stranger that they took to heart, they ended up paying for it, in many cases, with their lives. It cost over half the party their lives, pretty much. And I think that's part of the reason why it's also kind of stuck there in the American consciousness for so long. It's just kind of one of those odd, creepy episodes in history that happens every once in a while, but no one likes to really talk about, but we know it's there. And this is definitely fits that category. But that, I think, concludes it for this little brief rundown. Again, we were just covering the basics here. I mean, I'm sure you can go and go to the libraries or go online and whatever web source you might want to use, and there's probably all kinds of more information on the Donner Party. I believe in California, the actual lake in the past where they were trapped is now like a national park, not a national park, but a state park or preserve. And you can actually go see many of these sites, and they have a museum, I believe, and statues and stuff kind of commemorating the history of the ordeal. But I mean, that's pretty much all it was. There's not really much more than that after April of 1847 when the last survivor leaves. So, if anyone has any questions or any comments or anything about the Donner Party or anything they'd like to share about the Donner Party that they know or have heard of themselves, feel free to put that in the comments section. Again, enlighten us all if you know something that we missed or we didn't talk about and you seem to know it. Enlighten us. Tell us. We'd love to hear it. But I think that will wrap it up for today. So for next week, and thank God I'll have that thing working again. For next week, we should be doing one more video along the lines for Halloween. I'm still trying to decide on a final topic for that, but we will have one. I just got to figure that out. And that will be, I'm hoping, Monday or Tuesday. If not, it might be a day or two late, but I mean, it will still fit. That whole week's just going to be Halloween week to me. So if I can't get it done Monday or Tuesday, depending on what my schedule ends up looking like in terms of personal business, then we'll just have to move it to later in that week. But we will do one next week. So that will conclude this video until next week. So again, any comments, questions, added information, feel free to leave it. And hopefully everyone hopefully maybe they got enlightened a little bit from this and will continue to maybe look it up themselves. So until next week, may everyone continue to do well, and may God bless you all.